Good morning, everyone. My name is John Shaw, and I'm the director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute at SIU. Thank you so much for joining us today and for another one of our great conversations on understanding our new world. And we have today one of the most, I think, interesting and compelling forces and voices in American politics, Rahm Emanuel. Rahm is a fellow Illinoisan and has had about every job you can imagine in American politics. He was a senior aide to President Clinton. He was a successful congressman, a member of the House Democratic leadership. He was the White House chief of staff under President Obama, and then became the two-term mayor of Chicago. He's also the author of a terrific new book about the importance of mayors in American life, in American society. So Rahm, thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good. Well, Rahm, as we were chatting before we started, one of the things that's most striking as I think about your background is just how you started. And you were part of this remarkable moment, I think, certainly in Illinois political history, which was this insurgent 1984 Senate campaign in which a downstate congressman by the name of Paul Simon took on the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Chuck Percy, and one of the really kind of marquee races of 1984. You're basically right out of college and you joined the campaign. Tell us about that experience. What was it like?
Well, let me just say, I think a couple things. One is I can't think of two different personalities than Paul Simon and Rahm Emanuel. My vocabulary did not expand beyond 4 letters, and his vocabulary never had anything less than 4 letters. But on a serious note, you know, Paul was part of this the reform movement. People forget this. Reagan wins in a landslide in '84, and 2 senators get elected, bucking that trend, Al Gore in Tennessee and Paul Simon. And while a lot of people talk about big personalities that change Chicago and Illinois politics, I think Paul somewhat gets underappreciated, mainly because of style and tone and tenor. But I got my start in national politics working for Paul Simon. David Axelrod leaves journalism and does his first kind of advertising in a campaign for Paul Simon. David Wilhelm, who's the manager, goes on to run Bill Clinton's 1992 presidential campaign, started in Paul Simon. There's Lisa Madigan. I mean, there's Dick Durbin. There's a whole host of people who's both city, state, and national. Forrest Claypool becomes county commissioner, head of the Chicago Public Schools. Under my tenure, did stuff for President Obama as a senator. So there's tons of state reps. And so when you look at both Illinois politics, et cetera, I think Paul Simon is one of the more beyond policy, just in the sense of the inspiration to other people going into elected office and other things in politics. Paul Simon is probably one of the most formative figures nationally and obviously in the state of Illinois. He also, I give this advice to a lot of people, but I was running for Congress. He came to endorse me. It was early, about the first 2 weeks when I said I was going to run. And Paul had actually known my main opponent, Nancy Kazak, but an Ab Mikva, who I worked with also, endorsed her. But Paul came to endorse me. And it was over at a manufacturing facility behind our house on the other side of the alley, manufactured HVAC equipment, et cetera. And as we're touring afterwards, you know how Paul is. He looked at me and he goes, "You know, Rahm, the way you should not think of these things as, you know, that's a bad invitation. I could do a better Clinton. We'll do that later." But anyway, he says, "Every year, update your 5-year plan." And to be honest, I had a goal coming out of college, which was to get to the White House. And I got out of college in 1982. In 1992, I was in the White House. When I run for Congress in 2002, Paul had given me this advice. And the truth is, it's exactly what I do. It's what I tell my own children, but other people have come to me for advice. I said, stop thinking about a job, think about a career, and the best way to prepare for it is every year update your 5-year plan. And both personally, professionally, Paul has been a tremendous inspiration of going into public life. And I joke sometimes, while he's always known as good government, et cetera, I think a lot of the values, though, come from my parents, my faith, my commitment to Judaism. But that said, I went through the Clinton White House, Congress, mayoralty, Obama's presidency, and the one thing beyond certain things and policies I've worked on, never hired a lawyer. And I think Paul set a standard for all of us in public life, and what, public life is, what you can do with public life in the sense of putting your thumb on the scales and tilting it in an equitable way.
Well, when you entered I know you were a fundraiser and also did field operations. Was there any kind of training? Or you just sort of tossed in and said, start working the phones and raising money? I mean, what was and again, it was a really tough, fierce campaign. I mean,
well, it wasn't, first you had to win a primary. It was very unusual with Chicago people in it for a downstater with very low name recognition to win. And then you had he gets through the primary, he has this wind in his face because Reagan is having an incredible 1984 landslide. But Percy had been there a long time. And I remember this debate, and it was actually the beginnings of a larger narrative that carries on in politics. And David Axelrod and I often talk about this, but it was a point about Chuck Percy, beyond everything, was obviously a very successful businessman, quite wealthy. And I think I'm getting the numbers wrong, but you'll get the direction right, which was the headline we wanted was there's 1,185 millionaires in Illinois. Who will represent the rest of us? And that was the beginning of trying to, and that was not the first time the issue of class, boys, democracy, or et cetera. But it was a tough slug out fest fight. And Paul won. There was, it was a lot of back and forth and a lot of hit. There was a key moment in a debate, et cetera. But he won against and those were the days, if you look now, we talk about politics. Today, there's a lot more voting from president all the way down to state rep party line. Those were the days where there was about 20% of the electorate did ticket splitting. That doesn't happen today. And that's how Paul got, I'm doing this by memory, but I think it's like 1.3 million. It's pathetic that I would remember numbers, but it's, I think, 1.3 million Reagan-Simon voters. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but it was a big number, which is how we broke the back of the tidal wave.
Did you have a chance to keep in touch with him later on? I know you went to the Clinton White House, and he.
Oh yeah, yeah. Let me say this. I wouldn't say so much me keeping in touch with Paul as so much as Paul. No, when I got elected, we stayed in touch, and he was somebody that was always there for advice and counsel on a lot of things. But the truth is, I got elected to Congress in 2002, and within a term, I was elevated to leadership to run the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee that led to Nancy Pelosi becoming the first woman speaker and stuff like that. So I was immediately put into, which is what I wanted to do, which is political work, et cetera, and stuff like that. But we worked on a number of issues across lines.
Great, good. Well, Rahm, let's talk about your book.
Not so much when he was a senator, but he would always come in and call you with ideas and stuff like that.
Great. Good. Well, Rahm, let's talk about your book. It's a very provocative, interesting book about the important role that mayors play in American life. And your thesis is pretty direct. You think mayors are the most consequential, tangible people in public policy right now. Explain why.
Well, there's a number of factors that go into that. One is both dysfunction and delegitimacy of national governments and international. When you look at Brussels, there's not a lot of confidence in Europe there. You look at London, not a lot of confidence there. And I sometimes jokingly, but unfortunately, and I don't relish this. So I'm not advocating, I'm just observing. DC's become somewhat of Disneyland on the Potomac. And that dysfunction, that delegitimization for a host of both political, economic, and cultural reasons. And then you look at a government. Local government is the most intimate, as I say in the book, immediate and impactful on where you live, work, and play. And when you think about in your own life, not just the university, but the university and the community. You think about, where do you raise your kids? What's the amenities of the neighborhood? What community you're going to live in? The parks, the libraries, the schools for your children, how you get to and from work, all the things that go into your life. Those are services that your local government delivers and impacts. And so to me, that's why it's one of the most important. And B, it is the government that you feel you can, if you felt the national government you have no impact on, but if you wanted to see change in your life, your local government is where you have the capacity. And I don't think it's an accident. I would just say, if you look at President Obama's postings in the last week, he talked about getting engaged in local government because the policies that most affect right now in this moment is local government. And so to me, it was an observation, having been in politics for 30 years, worked at one end of Pennsylvania Avenue to the other, two different administrations for two individuals that I have immense respect for. But I could see this shift going. And, if you grow up in Chicago, the mayor is, the job. And it was open. And then I could also, not just because it is one of the most influential of all mayoralties, not only in the country, in the world, in democratic countries. That said, you could see the center of gravity of our politics move more and more intensely local, both on economic grounds, policy grounds, etc. So there's a host of factors, and it's like pick up stick, but if you pull them all apart, and I think, whether it's the virus or whether it's what's going on today on the streets as it relates to police legitimacy, etc., you can see the front row that mayors play.
Rahm, I was struck by a quote in your book with, I think it was Tom Barrett of Milwaukee, who at one point says, being a mayor does not involve a lot of theory. It's solving problems. It's figuring out what works.
Yeah.
So play off that, and also the point you make in the book about the enormous sharing that goes on between mayors across parties and even across countries. It's a real community of sharing and idea exchange.
Well, let me just tease out a couple things as examples of that. But look, all of us and I'm sure some of your students and other professors now, you study things and you look at the New Deal, take that as an example. And a lot of those ideas are first tried at the state level, local level, and gravitate up. Today, ideas are moving not vertically, but horizontally across cities. And I'll give, one thing I did, and, what I've also, and I think Tom points, and then I'll come back on one point. I had started in Chicago a thing called the Chicago Star Scholarship, which is you got to be average in high school. We made community college free. And I would mark you, it's the first public funded scholarship a dreamer can get in America. We gave you free tuition, books, and transportation. Today, I started that 5 years ago, a little over 10,000 kids have availed of those. About 2,000 kids a year, 1,800 kids a year do it. And it has double and triple both retention and completion rates over the norm. Boston, Denver, Oakland, Seattle, all doing it. States that are doing it are Tennessee, Rhode Island, Oregon, Hawaii, I think Kentucky and Arkansas. I've lost count, but okay. Not one mayor, not one governor has been asked to Washington to either testify or brief the Secretary of Education. Ideas move horizontally. We replicate, and everybody's got a different variation on the same music. Mine was tied to a B average because I was on my own. I got no federal aid, no state aid, still don't, etc. Boston does it different. Tennessee, you graduate high school, you can go. They don't get transportation and books, but it was not tied to a grade point average. I tied it to a grade point average. We also did one other thing in Chicago. If you kept the B average in community college, all the universities in Chicago, plus U of I and others in the state, will then give you somewhere between 25 to 50% off the tuition for your junior, senior year. So, but to me, these ideas aren't floating up. They're floating across. Now, in Chicago, we are in the last year of converting all our street lights to LED with a smart grid. I was at a conference early in my tenure, 2012, and Mayor Gregor out of Vancouver had talked about these LED lights saving energy, saving Chicago $100 million over a decade, and smart poles, etc. And I wrote it down on a card, and I gave it to staff. And we're replicating. We're literally on the last 4-year implementation. I had a conference with the mayor of Paris in Chicago, with about the mayor of Lahore, Pakistan, the mayor of Cape Town, South Africa, mayor of Haifa of Israel, Milan, Italy, Buenos Aires, Mexico City, and different cities in Sweden. It was a whole international conference on cities and waterfronts, and we learned different ways of what we now have the Riverwalk in Chicago, etc. But it was ideas that we learned from each other of how to re-engage our environment and integrate it into the quality of life of a city and make it both an economic and ecological opportunity. And so those ideas don't move or gravitate to national policy. They're moving now horizontally, not vertically. And those are just, I could give you a ton of things we're doing in Chicago that we imported, and a ton of things we exported. And one of the things that Mayor Barrett and I from Wisconsin talked about in Milwaukee, we have a thing called Becoming a Man. It's a mentoring program. He has a big initiative on mentoring. We started with a thing with the University of Chicago, 100 kids. We now have 8,000 young men with a mentor in that program. And now Boston's doing it, Dallas is doing it, LA is doing it, Seattle's doing it. Again, horizontal ideas, not vertical.
Rob, let's talk a little bit about climate, because prior to reading your book, I assumed that mayors put out strong statements in connection with climate change, but really didn't have a lot of power. But in your book, you point out that mayors have some tangible control on things like retrofitting buildings and mass transit. And in your case, you closed down 2 coal plants on the Chicago River in Chicago. Talk about what the mayors can do on the issue of climate change.
Well, we did it. There's a thing from, I think, 2015 called the Chicago Climate Charter, which about 89 cities across both the United States and Canada, some internationally, signed. We're accustomed to their city, so that we as a city will hit the Paris goals by 2025. And it was custom to what Chicago did, different from what Vancouver was doing, different from what Paris did, but all getting to the same place at the same time. And mayors, look, whether it's auto traffic or the emissions out of big buildings, cities are a major contributor to greenhouse gases. And there are policies you can implement that fundamentally change those. So we were the only city left, major city in America, with 2 coal-fired power plants. And through a lot of, let's just say, persuasion, it was a 20-year battle. Within my first year, or first 15 months, they were shut. Second, the LED lights, much more energy efficient. We converted, the process of converting our street buses to both either hybrid or electric. We had put 58 million square feet, both public and private, under a major retrofit program to use less energy and become much more energy efficient. We put 200 miles of bike lanes throughout the city of Chicago. You had to publish for any building, I'm doing this by memory, 6 floors or up, residential or commercial, you had to publish your energy use and consumption and costs. And so there's a series of policies you could put in place, and Chicago's economy in the 10-year, grew in the double digits, and its greenhouse gas emissions shrunk by 9 or 10%. So the economy grew, employment was at the highest level in history, and yet our greenhouse gas emissions shrunk. And mayors have many tools rather than just rhetoric. And that's a hard thing for a guy who's the mayor of the city called the Windy City because of our greenhouse gas emissions from our hot air. But on a serious note, buildings, cars, transportation, lights, retrofit, publishing data, so you use the public domain to shame people to better policies. All those attributes can make a significant dent in the greenhouse gas. And I want to be honest, even though I worked with President Clinton and President Obama, both on Kyoto and Paris, and I was out of the White House on Paris, but the early discussions, I came to the office thinking mayors could do certain things, but the truth is this is a national, international. And I would say in the first 2 years, I mean, I came to the coal plant not as greenhouse, but as environmental policy, because they were in Pilsen and Little Village, poor working class Hispanic communities. And I did it out of environmental justice at first. And I would say about 2 years in, I started to realize, and I was into retrofit from other things in my congressional, these were not just environmental policies. You can make a bigger statement. And that was, to be honest and fair, while they were originated out of environmental and environmental justice policies, I then emerged and realized mayors have a bigger role to play on climate change. And the things I was doing were not just environmentally sound. They were, ecologically necessary. And that was kind of I would call it a conversion on the road to Damascus. And let me say this, that's a big call for a Jewish kid to say on the way to Damascus. So,
Rob, in terms of OHare, obviously there was this major $10 billion infrastructure, runways, terminals, et cetera. And you, as you point out in your book, it was part of a broader national effort of like $100 billion in capital improvements in major airports across the country, but with a very minimal federal role at all. I mean, this is another example of each community just sort of figuring out who do I need to negotiate with to make this happen. Talk about OHare.
It's interesting because OHare, 85% of all air traffic is United and American. And we're the only city in the United States where 3 of the 4 major airlines have major operations. Nobody else has that, American, United, and Southwest. And working with them, I know here is the original P3, because American and United, at least at there, play a central role. So some people were doing terminals, some people were doing runways. We put the whole package together, which was we took the runways, rationalized them, which made the capacity of OHare grow to Midway, adding OHare and Midway together into one airport. That's what the runway efficiency model. And then between Terminal 1 and 3, which is United and American, the second terminal, which was always a stepchild or an orphan, we are rebuilding. So it'd be the first global alliance terminal in the United States of America, meaning you get off at domestic and get on an international in the same terminal. So you can go from American and United and all their sister alliances within the same terminal. Now I joked, it'll be the first airport where you don't need a Fitbit to get around. Now obviously that's pre-virus. And I think a lot of aviation challenges and changes are going to happen, both as we adjust ourselves, et cetera. But the idea was to modernize, and the papers noted, we were modernizing OHare, so we will play not only a central role in the aviation of the world. It's the second most globally connected airport in the United States, right after Heathrow. But I don't know why I keep pointing. It's not like Heathrow's over there, but but it would be, OHare was so central as an economic engine for Chicago and the Chicago area that it needed to be modernized. And if you want, I say this in the book, and I believe this both on bikes, mass transit, roads, but airports. If you want a 21st century economy, you have to have a 21st century transportation system. You cannot keep competing on something that was built 50 years ago, operating at the pace and speed and efficiency of 50 years ago. Not capable, not possible.
Rob, let's talk maybe a little bit more aesthetically focused. The Riverwalk in Chicago, and just a couple of years ago I saw it for the first time, and I was just stunned at just how magnificent it is. And in your book, you describe your efforts to really to work on that, and your collaboration with a good friend of the Institute, Ray LaHood, who was then Secretary of Transportation. So you were able to persuade that maybe the Coast Guard and the Army Corps of Engineers were involved. So tell us about that collaboration with
Well,
Ray on that.
okay, I'll go back and I'll be real quick. You know, I'm running for office, and Ray knows this, and anybody who's running for office, sometimes you get in the moment and you make a pledge. And I was running for office, and I studied what I was the author in Congress introducing the Great Lakes Restoration Act. But I'm walking out and said, and I'm familiar with Daniel Burnham, and he had a plan originally for the river and the lake. That was so I made a pledge. I said, we're going to make the river the next park of the city of Chicago. I don't know what the hell I was saying. I just got caught up in the moment, and I said this. So I started building 4 different park facilities for rowing, canoeing, and kayaking. And I believe that if you brought people to the water, they would demand cleanup. And I'll get to that in a second. Anyway, fast forward, we come to have a meeting with Ray. So anyway, people are starting to row, canoe. Jeannie Gang, the architect, designed 2 of them. One of them won an amazing amount of awards. We get to a meeting with Ray. We're going to do the 95th Street L station under TIFIA, the long distance parking and car rental under TIFIA loan program. It's a federal program. And I was supposed to have a plan for the river, and on the cab ride over, I'm like, God damn it, guys. I said we were going to have this meeting. Ray's giving us this meeting. I need a plan. And one of my airport people, and anyway, in the car, they said, well, you made this pledge about the river. Let's finish the Riverwalk project. And in the meeting, you know, everybody else has pictures and videos and whatever. I literally leaned back on my former ballet dancing days as a Joffrey dancer. I do this dramatic, you know, hand gestures and performance art about returning people to the river, And Ray looks at me and goes, what does a river walk have to do with transportation? I said, Ray, are you sitting down? I said, the river is run by the Coast Guard and the Army Corps. It's a transportation project. And to his great, he gave it to us. I mean, approved the loan. Now, that's a whole separate process. You have to prove that you can pay back 3%, They give you the 10% or 20% down payment, etc. And we built the Riverwalk, and now we've also added and fixed the old part, or it's in the process, should be done this year. Anyway, the Riverwalk has exceeded every imagination economically, etc. It's on pace to pay back the loan in 13 years rather than 35. It has last 3 years in a row, it grew by somewhere like 20 to 40% compounded each year. And it's generating now revenue. 2, and this is bigger than the Riverwalk, but the demands going through, and I give credit to the Friends of the Chicago River. Chicago 30, 40 years ago had 6 different species left. It's north of 67 now in the river. And then we changed the policy. So if you're building on the river, not only is it public access, you have to adopt 2, you know, if it's 50 feet of riverfront, you have to adopt 1 of 3 categories for ecological maintenance and improvement. If it's 100 feet, you have to adopt out of 2 different categories, 2 different things you're going to do to improve. And if it's more than 100 feet, you have to adopt something out of each of the 3 categories. The Friends of the River helped us. And Chicago's river is, as I said, stands apart from the city of Chicago, but it is now part of the whole. And it's actually goes back to Daniel Burnham's original plan of 2 waterfronts for the city. One, the front yard of the lake, and the other one, the river that runs the spine of the city. And the Riverwalk could not have done it without Ray's friendship and his vision. And it has been Millennial Park, no doubt changed the image of the city, but the Riverwalk has opened up a part of the city that literally I grew up, you never really put it into your mind's eye, and now it's part. Now look, Paris is doing that with the Seine. London is doing that with the Thames. Obviously, we have San Antonio. Brooklyn is doing what they're doing on the waterfront. But Dallas is now rebuilding an entire water. The book takes this. There's about 30 cities in the United States reinventing their front yard or their wherever it may sit in the body of the city, their relationship to their riverfront. And you know, I want to also pay tribute to the predecessors in the city and by making, you know, we're the only city on the Great Lakes that never industrialized its lakefront. It's an amazing environmental policy in the late 1800s. The river was Chicago's industrial highway. And we are now, and one of my favorite quotes out of the book is there's a industrial meltdown. So when you think of certain things we did, the river, eliminating the coal plants, opening it up ecologically, taking the old Bloomingdale Railroad Trail and making it a horizontal park that runs 3 miles. The old Meigs Airfield and making it a nature preserve in the city, 50 acres. Taking these old industrial transportation systems and reclaiming them as part of the ecological, environmental, and well-being of a city, I think makes cities a place where you can both live, work, and play.
Well, Rahm, in your book, in terms of Ray, you talk about just actually the friendship you developed when you were in Congress. You know, he's obviously a Republican from downstate Illinois. You're a Democrat from Chicago. You were part of the congressional delegation and just said, let's work together. You hosted bipartisan dinners. You just developed the sense of what can we do to fix things for Illinois. Huh. Talk about that kind of ethos. I mean, is that still alive? Do you see more other examples of that happening now?
Yes and no. Well, first of all, you know, so I would say there's 4 things. Ray's a Republican, I'm a Democrat. Ray's downstate, I'm from Chicago. Ray is Lebanese, I'm Jewish. So if you wanted to, you could say, well, here's all the divisions. Ray's a father, I'm a father. Ray was a former staff person that emerged as a congressman. I'm a former staff person that emerged as a congressman. Ray and I used to, you know, the end of votes and you would run to the airport, etc. And while Ray was always nice to me when I got elected, reached out, etc. And a lot of people, you know, because I'm coming from the white, you know, earlier in the Clinton era, had this kind of looked out of their side, and more Democrats actually than Republicans, like, who is this kid? We used to get on flights, and if my seat was in front of Ray and Ray had to catch the flight to Peoria, all I had to do was catch the train down and go home. I would let him take my seat so he could make, you know, at least save 5 minutes and get to the other gate for the Peoria flight. And we became dear friends and hung on to the parental role, the respect for the institution we had, the sense as immigrant children, what a great country we had. We knew this, we could always pinch ourselves every day about that. And so we decided, it was partisan then, we would host a dinner every other week. And it would be 6 Republicans, 6 Democrats, not always the same. Ties off, rolled up sleeves, just, you know, not just ties in the sense of men. And we would all just talk and nothing ever leaked from it. And trust me, a lot of people got trashed. And I'm not talking about through liquor, I'm talking about leadership, okay? Nobody ever leaked on each other. And it was a way of just saying, let's try to have a friendship here. We'll do what we got to do. We'll have our policy difference. We'll have our fights, but try to create the threads that remind us that we're all still in an institution we respect, and we still respect. We may not agree with each other, but at least we don't question your commitment to either your constituents or your country. And it became a lifelong friendship. And then when I was helping President Obama as his chief of staff and in the transition, there's an interesting story. Ray wanted to be Secretary of Agriculture. That's where I was advocating for Vilsack. And it got filled. And I said, look, Mr. President, Ray was your first endorsement as a Republican. He helped you when you were a senator. He belongs in the administration. And we thought of both transportation. I had to convince Ray's first answer, why would I want to do transportation? I think he, in the end of the day, loved it. But it was a back and forth, but it was a friendship out of a mutual respect for public service. And he stays as a dear friend of mine. We talk pretty regularly. I had called on him as mayor multiple times, not just as Secretary of Agriculture. One of the last things I did as mayor was I created a task force on mobility and reinventing transportation. And Ray became, I asked him to chair it, and he did. And it's still the blueprint for the city to think of transportation and mobility for over the next 20 years.
Ron, as mayor, when you would go down to Springfield to work on various issues, did you find an appreciation for the importance of Chicago in the overall Illinois community, or was there a sense of, you guys got your own set of problems, figure it out, we're on our own? Because there's the people who are extreme and say, let Chicago go on their own. Was that a prevailing attitude in Springfield?
Well, first of all, I had a very, look, I approached legislative. When you look at finishing 6 pension bills, for the first time ever solving a 100-year school financing, and a lot of these were over gubernatorial vetoes. So the answer is yes and no. Now, one, you can only find 1 or 2 times I went down to Springfield professionally. Because I thought if I went there, everybody would go, oh, it's Chicago. So I purposely did not go. Now, I worked the phones. I mean, I probably am half of AT&T's profits. But I worked the phones heavy. But I would not go there because I thought the image would become an easy target for those who say, this is a Chicago bailout. And then everybody goes into their tribe. So I never purposely, but I'll give you a story out of the school financing. It's in the book. Is I said our strategy, and I think it was the right strategy politically, it turned out to be the right legislative political strategy, was we were going to be in the boat with everybody else, not on a raft on our own. And what I meant by that is we would bring underserved cities into a coalition to change the school formula. Speaker Madigan and President Cullerton were and their staffs and other members very helpful. And we produced a bill, even against a governor's veto, that ended up answering this school funding inequity that existed for 100 years. If you were poor and a child of color, you were a second citizen in Illinois when it came to education until that bill. Fact, we were rated as the 50th out of 50 worst state funding of education for kids of color and kids of poverty. And that school finance bill radically changed the funding for education and for kids of color. All that said, I think there's a greater appreciation than our last 50 years of Chicago as a central role in the economy and well-being of the state. There are still the old DNA that if you said it's a Chicago bailout, everybody polarizes. And I think any mayor of Chicago has to figure out how to build a coalition that is more metropolitan than it is singular just for Chicago. And I think, if you look at the strategy we embarked on, education's one. I could go through the pensions as well on others. When we did we passed 5 overrides of governor vetoes with bipartisan overrides. If you make it only about Chicago, more likely to lose than win. If you make it about a solution that everybody has a piece of the win, more likely to succeed.
Ron, one thing that struck me just about the vibrancy of Chicago, in your book, you mentioned that each June, something like 140,000 college graduates move to Chicago. I mean, that's the size of a large Illinois city. Each year, that many, and of course, they come from across the world, across the Midwest, throughout Illinois. But that's just an astonishing way of illustrating just how important Chicago is.
Well, look, I mean, here I was just on the phone yesterday with the Civic Committee. I'll get a couple points. Chicago has more institutions of higher learning than any other city in the United States but Boston. Chicago has more research universities both in the city and within a 250-mile radius than any other city in the globe. I used to joke that around early June on graduation day, don't get on the highway between Madison and Chicago, you'll be roadkill. But that's true of Ann Arbor. It's true. We end up being the #1 city kids graduate. And in the race for talent, companies and businesses are going to open up or relocate for that intellectual bandwidth. And that includes kids coming from college, institutions, the rest of the state of Illinois, and the rest of the Midwest and the rest of the globe. I think there's some things that we should do, and I advocate that, and as part of a larger discussion I'm more than willing to go into about, but that 140 to 145,000 kids every year coming from DePaul, Loyola, UI, Southern Illinois, Northern Illinois, Indiana, Purdue, I don't have to run through all the schools to prove that I know their names, but they all come to the city of Chicago, and they have a Midwest work ethic. And that's an incredible advantage for the city that needs to be nurtured. I do want to say one thing, and you didn't ask this, and I think this is important at this moment. Learning has always been key to the economic and well-being of both a city, a person, etc. If you looked at the last 40 years, 30, it has been an exclusive model almost to the favor, from tax code to education to technology to globalism. An exclusive economic model that worked for those that come out of Southern Illinois, Champaign, or DePaul, etc. And that's that is a fact that I'm always reminded in the worst of the recession, the unemployment rate, when it hit 10.9, never hit higher than 4.7 for people with a 4-year degree. So it's basically full employment. We have to, as a country, convert to an inclusive model. And I advocated, when it was free community college, minimum wage that went up under my tenure to $13, free full-day kindergarten, free full-day pre-K, other policies without turning around. We have to figure out a more inclusive economic model, both on a tax code, etc. Because what you're really seeing across the globe, and mainly in the industrial developed world, the last 30 years have been an incredible period of time, but an incredible period of time for very few people. And if we don't figure out a model that gets more people in the winner's circle, this game is up. And there's a lot of pieces to what Minneapolis triggered, both on police and community relations, but also, and of equal value, an exclusionary economic model that it's run its course. And we're going to spend, and I ask all the students who are on this to spend a part of your life intellectually, personally, figuring out how to change the policies, the politics, your community to a more inclusive model. And there are going to be good days. There's going to be days you take 2 steps forward. There's going to be days you take a step sideways, and a day you take a step back. But we had warning on this. You can look at Pickney's book, etc. He talks about the tax codes in the developed world and education as the 2 biggest perpetrators, as well as models of a more exclusionary model versus a more inclusionary. Now, as mayor, I don't have a lot to do with the progressive tax code or not in Washington. But the reason I spent so much time on education, given where I was in my life and my children, it is the one thing that's your passport. And I know this is not where you wanted to go, but I didn't want to lose the opportunity to not speak about this, because it does affect cities. We have, in the place of education, you're going to have to get to a place where you start earlier in a child's life and you go longer in a student's life past high school. And that is the first and most essential step to a more inclusive economic model, which is why I'm proud, beyond our graduation rate and all this other thing, we finally in Illinois changed the education funding model. So poor children and children of color were actually equal citizens with an equally valuable future in the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago. That's for poor communities near your university, underserved communities, as well as the children on the south and west side of the city of Chicago.
Well, Rahm, I mean, one of your famous lines, which I'm sure is repeated back to you all the time, is never waste a crisis. Given just, the crises that are affecting the country now, spawned by COVID, the public health crisis, the economic crisis in its wake, now the civil rights, social justice crisis, given all this ferment, how can this be channeled in a way that there's a good outcome?
Well, I want to say, I'll say three things. One is, I said never, it was at a beginning in the transition of President Obama. I was at a conference by the Wall Street Journal. I said, never allow a good crisis to go to waste. It's the opportunity to do the big things you never thought possible and make them possible. And it has chased my sorry little tush all over. Everybody throws it at me. My wife, most particularly, this is a crisis. So here's how I look at this. You have a 100-year pandemic, a 75-year economic depression, and a 50-year civil and racial unrest. I don't think any of them are President Trump's fault, but I think he has exacerbated and made every one of them worse by his response. I think it's actually an opportunity to do exactly what I talked about in my earlier, just latter statement, which is this is an opportunity to redo things and think about things in a more inclusive way. And I'll give you one thought. My brother and I just have an op-ed. It's been accepted by the New York Times on this. So if there's any journalists, just please let us have it published first. But, and this is, and it's also about public policy and politics, okay? Medicaid is a federal-state partnership. Unemployment is a federal-state partnership. And in both crises, both the recession of 08 and now, the federal government has taken all of them to fund it because the states don't have money. And if you're going to get from to a universe to modernizing and strengthening the social safety net, something Democrats want, I think unemployment and Medicaid should become national programs. You would raise the bar, you would have the funding level, you would modernize them to include gig workers, you would modernize them to include, so no matter what happens, where you are in the economy, private sector, et cetera, health insurance, you have a modernized safety net relevant to the economy of today. That would free up $250 billion a year in state money. And the bargain would be that if the federal government took those and assumed all the responsibilities, so states no longer had to do 50-50, so to say, they would have to institute the things they do best. Universal full-day pre-K, free community college, and a massive increase in mass transit in infrastructure spending, whether it's on roads, rails, or runways, or bikes, whatever they want to do. But you'd have to have you couldn't have a marginal investment in education and transportation. You would have to increase your investments and do things policy-wise for this grand bargain to work. To me, Democrats would finally get a modern social safety net, and Republicans, at least at the state level, will be able to prove that they're reformers and they're more willing to invest in education and transportation. Or as I like to say, they would disprove a negative that they're not a bunch of knuckle-dragging Visigoths, okay? And to me, that's worthy of this crisis to do things that we have always talked about. And, you know, in 1960, Medicaid was right for a federal-state partnership. In 2020, if we were designing Medicaid fresh, would we design it the way we have it? In 2020, unemployment insurance was created in the 30s as part of the Depression. Is this really the best model we got? Almost half the workers in the country today don't get unemployment insurance in normal times. Let the federal government do what it does right. It achieves certain dreams that Democrats want. And let the states do what they do best, which is funding of education, and make things happen that need to happen on the early side of a child's life and on the latter side of a student's life, and let them do certain things that they have to do on transportation modernization so their local economies could become prosperous and growth. And not just transportation. There's schools, there's libraries, there's parks, there's a lot of things you could do on infrastructure, water treatment facilities. And to me, that would be a real federal-state partnership of a real bargain. And you would go to the strengths of both institutions. And more importantly, you would get the politics to work. And what I mean by that there's about 24 million people who live in Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, etc., who are never going to see health care because those states refuse to do Medicaid expansion. But rather than try to get the politics where they fight against, expanding Medicaid, let's get the politics works where they get to expand education. And I think something, and Ray's on the phone or on the video, if given the choice to go to a groundbreaking, a shovel shot, a ribbon cutting, or a graduation, or you get to announce, I have an expanded unemployment insurance role, which one do you think an elected official wants to go to? So let's get the politics to help advance the policy. And to me, that would be worthy of this 175 and 50-year moment. People in underserved communities would get health care. They would get a modernized, if they're in the gig economy, unemployment insurance, and their children would get an equitably funded education at the right point of their lives rather than when it's too late.
Well, Ron, we've actually taken more of your time than we had requested.
I've noticed.
And I think your staff is eager to get you on to your next assignment. So what we'd love to do is get you down here when it's safe, and maybe have you and Ray both come and spend a day or so and meet with students and talk to people here. And it'd be a great opportunity to kind of develop some of these, this partnership.
Let me say one thing. First of all, to all the students, I always say this. So, find somewhere in your life where you go into public service. It doesn't mean you run for office or whatever. Just give something back to this great country or your great city or community. We owed it. It's a rite of passage as a part of being a citizen. You can go about your lives in any other professional way, but find a point to do that. Second, I was joking with my wife. I look at your background with all the books, and everybody's doing these Zoom calls with their books in the back. And since part of this started with my book, my new fundraising goal is if you put my book behind you, I'll pay you $100. That should be I never left being a fundraiser. So now for everybody, Dora's Goodwin, every time I turn around, everybody's got Team of Rivals. She should be getting a residual just for the bookshelf. All right, man. Be good.
Thank you so much, Ron. Really appreciate it.
Everybody stay healthy and safe.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for tuning in to this wonderful discussion with Rahm Emanuel. And please feel free to go to our website and also our YouTube channel and look at this event again, send it on to friends and family. And again, thank you so much for joining us and spending part of your day with the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute. Thank you so much.